Ladies and gents, welcome to Beyonce Knows, the conversational podcast covering all things unimportant. No topic is off limits here. From the sublime to the ridiculous, we've got you covered. Let us know where you're listening from using the hashtag Beyonce Knows, or follow me on Instagram at Beyonce UK. This is the podcast. This is Beyonce Knows. As a horse racing enthusiast myself, I'm incredibly excited to be welcoming today's guest. He is the lead commentator for ITV Racing, an expert in the business of creating drama and emotion. His eminent tones are a staple of Saturday afternoon television, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome, without a doubt, my favourite commentator of them all, Mr. Richard Hoiles.
Hello, John. That's very, very, very kind indeed.
Thank you. It's all of it is true.
So I'm pleased you spent your Saturdays in front of the racing. That sounds promising.
About 3-4 years ago, maybe, one of my best mates took me to Ascot, and I had a good day, and I was hooked. I absolutely loved it. I live up on the Wirral now, much closer to Aintree, but I absolutely love it. So I'd imagine this podcast will probably be fairly heavily related to the horses.
It's funny though, isn't it? That's so true. There's sort of one in every class, we always used to say. For one person, It just clicks. For lots, it doesn't. You know, lots of people are embarrassed to say to me, "Oh, I've never been racing," as if I'm going to jump down their throats. But I understand. But for those that go and find it captivating, it's like opens up a whole new world, doesn't it?
It's my number one hobby now. I absolutely love it. As with every podcast, I start with a feature called Quickie Picky, a series of nonsensical questions. I've got 11 for you today. Are you happy to crack on with that feature?
Yeah, definitely. You'll probably get a few nonsensical answers as well.
That's fine. More nonsensical, the better. We'll kick off. Question 1. Who would win in a press-up competition, you or Jerry Hannon?
Jerry Hannon, I reckon, to be honest. I am so unfit. He'd describe it better than me as well, probably. It'd be close.
Is Matt Chapman as vibrant off camera as he is on it?
Unbelievably, yes. Which is astonishingly wearing, but he's very, very good entertainment.
I love the guy.
You know,
I think he's brilliant.
It's you either like or loathe, but then you can be 5 minutes the other way round, and then you're liking him, and 10 minutes later you're loathing him. That's the beauty of a good broadcaster.
Yes. What's your drink of choice down the pub?
Coke, I'm afraid. I'm completely non-alcoholic in that sense. I have to say, I make up for drinking it in huge quantities.
Right. What's the most difficult horse name to pronounce in commentary?
There's quite a few, to be honest. The worst ones are the Spoonerisms. So we've had a Winker Watson, had a Ducky Fuzz, which used to scare the living daylights out of me for those that played the drinking game. Because once you've got that one wrong, you're going to get it wrong loads of times.
Yeah.
And then there's the tongue twister ones that people deliver. I mean, I can hardly say it now, but unique New York is impossible to
especially if it's a big field.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, all prospective owners should know that if you give your horse a silly name, the commentator will mention it as few times as possible. So if you want your horse to be mentioned a lot, don't call it unique New York.
And where do you sit on the Envoi Allen or Envoy Allen?
Well, I go the slightly snobby one there with Envoi Allen, only because Allen is a breeding suffix, I think, in France. There's lots of them, and it's a bit like Collonges. There are a few Collonges as well. It doesn't actually mean much, but yeah, they're normally to indicate where the pedigree started or what have you. So people. You know, it doesn't matter as long as it's recognisable to the general public. But when they get good, it gets difficult because Corto and Kauto Star, whatever it was, you know, at the end of the day, you end up going with the majority. But at the moment, I'm Envoi Allen. Rightly or wrongly.
I enjoyed Fergal O'Brien's Twitter thing recently of Polish or Polish.
That's right. Now for us, you see. I was just going to say it's very clever because he doesn't specify, does he? He just asks which one.
Question 5.
Would you rather? Polish, by the way, because they had a lot of them. Well, that's what we reckon because it was named by a Rothschild, and they had a couple of other horses that were similar. Like it wasn't Shine, but they had a string of 3 or 4 that would have made it Polish. But
he's
I don't
good value.
It was really that easy to know the answer. So yeah.
Would you rather have constantly dry eyes or a constantly runny nose?
Oh, constantly dry eyes. Runny noses drive me nuts. As a hay fever sufferer as a kid, my cricket days were plagued by runny noses. So dry
Yeah,
eyes.
fair enough. Who's the best jockey of all time?
Best jockey of all time is going to be a name that doesn't mean too much to many of you, I suppose. Felix Kutsi.
No,
I'm biased. I worked with him for a lot of years out from Hong Kong and what
right.
have you. So, yeah, look, he was a absolute top class rider, multiple champion in South Africa. We worked together in Hong Kong, and then after I came back for 4 or 5 years, and his daughter was his daughter was bridesmaid at my wedding. So,
Oh wow,
yeah, has to be Felix Kutsi. Seen some good ones though. A lot of South Africans actually. Douglas White was fantastic when I was out over there as well. In this country, again, Frankie Dettori when things are going well, Kieran Fallon on a day-to-day basis. If you wanted someone to ride for your life, it probably would be Kieran.
yeah.
Probably as long as you gave him a cut.
What is your favourite cheese?
I'm a sucker for cheeses. That's a good one. Good goat's cheese, Cambozola, and if you want something a bit, and so if you want something a bit harder, Harlech cheese. It's got bits of horseradish in it. I think it's a Welsh hard cheese. Yeah,
Fantastic.
one of my foibles, cheese. Yeah.
Good. I'm glad I asked that. Who is the single most inspiring person you've ever met, and why?
Oh my word, blimey, that is really hard. Let's go for someone current, and it's not really met other than through the social media. There's a young lad called Ashton Hume, who was the under-12 goalkeeper for my side, Crewe.
Right.
Was diagnosed with cancer comparatively recently. And unfortunately, as part of that diagnosis, has had to have a leg amputated.
Oh.
And lots of the goalkeepers and lots of Crewe have all got behind, obviously, him. But his outlook is absolutely astonishing. And he turned up at the training ground the other day, and it was a memorably moving. So Ashton Hume would definitely be one. In terms of people I've met, I think Pat Smullen, who sadly passed away as well. We worked with him actually coming up to the anniversary at Chester about 2 or 3 years ago. I hadn't met him to that point. Obviously, I'd seen him ride. And someone who can cope with such a positive outlook to something that had such a negative ending, and wasn't always certain that was going to be the case, but he must have had a feeling that was going to be, given the type of cancer it was. To raise that amount of money, and in doing so, put himself through so much. There's people like that cope with all sorts of battles, and lots of them you and I don't know. They're people you might walk by on the street who maintain a fantastically positive outlook when things don't go right. So those two, Ashton Hume and Pat Smullen, would be high on my list.
Yeah, brilliant. Great answer. Cheltenham or Aintree?
Cheltenham.
Cheltenham.
Well, actually, no, that's unfair. No, that's unfair. I'm going to take that back. Sorry, I thought you were going to say Cheltenham or Ascot. No, if it's Aintree, it's Aintree. And the reason is partly because where you are. If the missus ever sees it, I'd get killed if I didn't say Aintree. Definitely Aintree. Sorry, I thought you were going to say Cheltenham and Ascot. Because it's the city's race. My wife comes from Liverpool.
Right.
And the scenes we got, my first one was the bomb scare one. Didn't look if it was going to happen. I was stuck up a gantry when everybody else started coming out towards me. And it didn't look as if I was going to do it, but I did do it on the Monday. And the people that filed in on that Monday, just for that one race at 5 o'clock. Great connection for the city and the race. Cheltenham's great, brilliant. But one-off Aintree. Yeah.
And the last one, what is the worst lie you've ever been told? Sorry, you've ever told or been told?
Oh, my word. The worst lie. There's probably quite a few to choose from, really. The worst lie I've ever been told. Probably when I started out that I was any good.
I won't have it.
No, I don't know. No, I think when you start out, people say very nice things to you, and or that I was a good accountant before I was a good commentator.
That's interesting because that's the end of the Quickie Piggy feature, and one of my early questions, because I believe it was 1992 you got into it. Yeah. Tell the story. I've read a little bit about it, but tell the story for the listeners about how you got into horse racing commentary.
So it is, I say pure fluke, but blimey, in terms of stars aligning. So I'm a qualified accountant. I was then. I just qualified. I was quite young. I'd gone through the poly route, which doesn't exist anymore. And
Right.
I was a fairly aggressive young analyst who was working their way through some, PLCs and enjoying myself. Though it was very entrepreneurial around that time, and lots of companies I was working for were going bust, and retail was under pressure. It was the last recession in '92. So basically, I was 26, I'd qualified, and normally the next stage for me would have been financial accountant or financial director of a small subsidiary of one of the PLCs I was working for. That's where all my friends and colleagues and people who were a couple of years older were going. But there was a recession on, and subconsciously people turn away from youth in recession and they go for the sort of more conservative aspect. So I was going for jobs and I wasn't getting them. They were employing someone who was 2 years older than me with a little bit more experience and playing it safe. And I'm thinking, blimey, either I'm going to have to go and do something really boring to fill in the bits of my CV, which I really hoped I'd never have to do, like financial accounting and things like that. Or I've got the qualification now. I never traveled. I went straight into work from school.
Right.
Well, poly, and straight into work from poly, only a year's course. So what the hell, I've got the qualification. Let's try and do something I really love. And like you, I was racing bug. Hadn't a clue how to get into it. Wrote lots of letters, got the occasional reply, but it was always, keep you on file and this sort of thing. There was just advert in the paper, advert in the sporting life to be a commentator. And I'd never grown up wanting to be a commentator. I did presentations. I'm comfortable, talking publicly, all of that. That was part of my role. I thought I knew racing to a degree where I could give it a go. And I was so naive, I didn't even send a demo tape in or anything like that. But my mum's other half...
Just an application.
Yeah, that's an application. And I got a letter knocking me back, but it crossed with the demo tape I finally realised I needed to do. And thankfully, my late mum's other half worked in TV. And obviously, as a favour to her, he set up a studio in his living room, effectively, to record me doing some races from Uttoxeter.
Right.
I'd never tried, and obviously, and away we went. We did 2 or 3 races, and we got to the end of the third one, and he sort of looked at me, and I thought, "Oh, here we go. You've done your bit, Pete. Fair enough." And he said, "I don't know who'd be more surprised, you or me, but in actual fact, you're actually okay." And obviously, we then worked on it, sent in the demo tape, and fair play to SIS because having already turned me down, if you like, to then actually say, "Well, no, come in and go to the next stage." And I just kept getting to the next stage. It was absolutely astonishing. It was like a kid in a sweet shop. I was thinking sooner or later someone's going to tell me, "Well, you've done well to get this far," and what have you. And it just kept going on, and the numbers went down and down and down. Eventually, the 2 people that were employed outside the existing commentators, myself and John Hunt, who of course now broadcasts for Radio 5, we were the 2 that got the jobs. And I'd like to think the people that showed us faith, particularly me with no experience whatsoever, look back on that day and think that they got the reward for being brave. John had been brilliant. He was already working for Ladbrokes, but we were both from outside the industry, so fair play to whoever did that process.
Yeah, I love a story. I think a lot of people who are respected in their field now, there's no such thing as there are very few examples of a standard beginning. I think, and it's fun to have. It's great to have a good story.
And the 2 things I think come out of it. One, people can do far more than they think they can. I wouldn't have believed that my accounting experience and standing up and doing presentations or being in the school play could actually have contributed to what I ended up doing. But it did, as did drawing silly little pictures of jockey's silks, when I started. But lots of people say to you, "Oh, you were really lucky." And I was, absolutely. But you say to them, "What have you done to try and do what your dream job, or what have you tried to do to change it?" And I said, "Well, I haven't quite got around to it." And that's the message really, is give it a go, particularly in this day and age where, the economy isn't what it was in terms of jobs for life and that sort of thing. So I'd really encourage people to identify things they love, because if you do love something, it comes across, and just go for it. Go for it.
I listened to a guy the other day who said that his least favorite phrase in the world is, "I haven't got time." If you love it that much, make time. Stop watching Netflix and try.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And even within now, I think, blimey, social media can be mine. I can get bogged down, in things which actually thinking, there's more productive things you could have done, or you've run out of time because you've been sidetracked on something that you think is perfectly genuine and everything. That's absolutely true. With family and everything else, they grow up quick. If you don't invest a little bit of time in them, they won't want to see you when you finally realise that you really did want to see them.
Yeah. So in terms of commentary, then obviously you've honed your skills over the years. The art of it. So your job, or I see as a the viewer, one of your jobs is creating the emotion and the drama. And how did you listen back? How have you found that's developed? Have you listened back to your races? Do you think you've got better?
I don't know. That's probably for other people to judge. In terms of how I started, I had this crash course because all of a sudden it became to get really real. When I was getting down to the last 12, I remember going to Hereford thinking, I've got to speak to someone who actually does this because, from the outside, I've looked in and think it's a big game. Now I've got to the stage where, in actual fact, I'm only 2 steps away from getting a job I would never have considered. And now I need to go and speak to them. So listening to lots of people, Australia was very potent for me. Bill Collins and people like that called. It was more that than Sir Peter O'Sullivan for me, just because of the time I was learning. And I went and watched a lot of people and worked out who fitted my personality. I'm not one who, I'm laid back, and Simon Holt and Ian Bartlett, even in those really early days, and they've been great friends ever since, were the 2 biggest influences because they just weren't phased. I remember Barty saying to me, there'll be stuff you don't know. There'll be stuff you don't know half a mile out. There'll be stuff you don't know 2 furlongs out. There'll be stuff you don't know 50 yards from the line. And the art is to make sure that, you're aware that that's a possibility and you learn how to cover it up. You don't panic when it happens. And so that sort of background was where I came from. I think the only thing I'd say is I don't think you create it. I think you just have the privilege of describing it, if you like. I think if you force it, it sounds forced. But I love racing, and I've witnessed some of the most amazing races, and I'm talking about it the same way I'm chatting to you. But you just describe, they're the stars. They're doing it, and you're just trying to find the language that does them justice, if you like. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. It can be so frustrating when you think you haven't. But ideally, the joy of it, the techniques that enable you to communicate it clearly. So, for me, it's language. Language is just so, for writers of racing, I'm fortunate that Alistair Down's become a friend down the years, but his writing and, you read a good book, whatever subject, and it paints those pictures in your mind. And, there's so many different ways of using words to really help a commentary rather than just the standard sort of cliches or something that does fit. But, but they're the stars. They're the ones. You're just trying to describe what you see. And people don't think, oh, it's a great commentary. They think, what a fantastic race. And your voice becomes the soundtrack to that race. And as a result, it gets well loved. The one I always use an example, I've said this many times before, is that they think it's all over line in the cup final. I mean, no one sat and thought, wow, that's great commentary, but it fitted exactly what happened.
And how many times have we all heard it?
Absolutely. And it's not that you sat there and some of Sir Peter's lines, very simplistic, but the mare's beginning to get up. Haven't heard a reception like it at Liverpool. I mean, they're not rocket science, but they absolutely fit what it's describing. And that's the art, really, to stay in the background, but use language to create something that enhances or does justice, actually, to what's going out on the track, for me, at least.
Yeah, I actually thought during COVID as well, the role of the commentator became even more important in any sport because there's no fans, and there's fan noise played into some sports and everything. But I thought you've got to. It's the game. There's as many points on the line in football. There's the same or similar prize money on the line in the horse racing. The role of the commentator was so interesting when COVID started, and I thought I'm listening to you guys and to sort of give me a really good description. And I thought it was fascinating. I thought everybody did really well. Actually, I didn't listen to anybody and think.
It was funny because I think initially in ITV, we were certainly with the Derby, we were sort of a bit guilty of underplaying that. We turned up to the Derby to see Epsom fenced off, no people, and then we witnessed a bizarre race where a horse went 12 lengths clear that no one really had considered and stayed there. And we were honestly, I think most of us at the time felt cheated. God, we'd gone through all this flaming effort to get here, and then we'd seen a bizarre race where most of the jockeys looked as if they'd fallen asleep, and it had been won by a horse that probably wasn't as good as it looked.
Yeah.
And we let that come across far too much. And people who were sitting at home, they were just watching the Derby as they had done with every other year. They thought they might have witnessed a superb performance. And there was us saying, oh, blimey, wasn't this? And so you learned pretty quickly that you're dead right. You had to imagine that it was exactly the same for them. They might be watching at home instead of at the track, but you had to be as upbeat. And whilst it seems rather strange sometimes to be yelling and the only other person I can hear is John 50 yards away also yelling, that is what is needed. Otherwise it can come across very flat. One thing I did find interesting was I got, you meet other commentators down the years, and so youngsters come to you, younger people come to you for advice, and they get breaks in different sports. So I know a few now who are scattered across.
Mm-hmm.
The football commentators, I think, must find it really weird. I call a race and it's finished. I've concentrated on the race, and then there's another race in 25 minutes. It must be really weird to call a football match and there's a break in play and there's nothing there.
Yeah.
You're in a deserted stadium. For me, that never happened because the race was going on, and it stops and that's the end of my role. Whereas if you're sitting in an empty stadium for 90 minutes, and I remember, exchanging messages with a few, the guy who commentates at the Crew, who thank Graham McGarry, who I've got to know, and others just saying, what's it like? Because we were the first sport back. Racing was the first one, And I'm going to a football match because football, didn't recommence until after that. What's it like? I said, well, blimey, from my point of view, it's not that much different. But from your point of view, I reckon it's going to be massively different. I don't hear fans shouting, Dettori for 25 minutes as a track. I hear them shouting their horse's name, and that's it. But you're going to find you're sitting there but then, so you call the Gold Cup at Ascot and need the loo, and you walk out into this massive grandstand with no one there. It's so surreal.
Is Stradivarius winning that again?
Yeah, I think he might, to be honest. I think it's his niche. They've tried him on other things. It's a bit like sort of, Altior hasn't come back to his best. But yeah, horses are specialists at certain things for a reason these days. There's not that many that can span distances. Once you start messing with a horse's trip, trying to turn him from some, Altior from a 2-miler up to 3, which is where they were going, Stradivarius back to 1.5 miles. It's just different. They have to be brilliant to cope with that. And we've got too many good horses in each of those divisions normally for that to happen. There's not that many like the old Desert Orchid days where he could run at 2 miles and win a Whitbread and a Irish National over 3 miles 5. It's just not really that easy anymore, I don't think.
Where are you on National Hunt versus Flat? What's your favourite?
Favourite would be National Hunt. So if I was a race goer, it would be National Hunt. The reason being is what you learn lasts longer. As soon as you get to grips with some of the 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds, they're off to stud, and you invest an awful lot of time. One of the challenges for us starting this weekend will be how to get these names into people's minds for the Guineas, the Derby. In 6 weeks' time, the Derby's done and dusted, and you've got to try. And for every 3 horses' names you try and introduce to the public, 2 of them fail. Whereas National Hunt, the return of an Altior or a Clandes au Beau or next year will have its own natural anticipation. You don't have to create it. Everyone knows those horses. So that's why I prefer National Hunt from a race goer point of view. Mm-hmm. As regards commentating, it's great. By the time we get past Daintree, I'm ready for the flat. And by the time I've called too many 27 runner maiden with 5 Hamdans, 3 Khaleds, and then I'm ready for jumping. And that's the beauty of being able to follow it day in, day out. But if you said, I could only go to one forever, or I was going to follow it as a punter or what have you, it would be National Hunt because what you learn lasts longer.
Yeah, I think from a punting perspective, the first ever meeting I went to was a flat, and it was Winter was the horse that horse that I had a big win on, and then it disappeared, and I thought, what? No, I was new to it. I hadn't had any experience studying. I was like, well, obviously, I saw Winter win handsomely there, so I'll back it in every race. And then, it's been retired. I'm going, what?
Yeah. Yeah. If that had been a novice hurdler, winning at the age of 4 or 5, you might have got 5 years more out of that horse. And in the old days, blimey, you only go back to my sort of era, we didn't have computer form books, and you didn't press a button and see a horse's career. You had form books that were wedged open with bits of paper. I had index cards. If you found a horse was really good at 2.5 miles on good ground, that could be a real money spinner. Now you can find that in 20 seconds by doing a few sorts on a database. But in those days, that wasn't what it was like. And so the things you picked up could, year in, year out, could pay you dividends, if you discovered the key to a horse and how a trainer was campaigning it, because it wasn't as obvious as it is now.
No.
And so that was the reason that, as you say, if you stumbled across a good horse or it would pay you back for years. Whereas that Winter example is perfect. As soon as you get to know them, commercial reality takes over, and away they go to stud.
Yeah, I'm really annoyed with myself. I didn't actually back Cole Reevy. Was it yesterday?
Yeah.
Because it was in my tracker, but I just didn't think it was possible.
No, and that's
oh.
I mean, that's it as well, because you learn as you go that you don't, as you say, when you start out, you find favourite horses and you back them whenever they run, and then you realise that in actual fact, you might have favourite horses, but it's a bit like seeing Linford Christie win a local athletics meet. You can back him again, but sooner or later he's going to be up against. He wasn't up against Usain Bolt, but you know what I mean.
I know what you mean. Yeah,
you know, the top sprinters of that generation. Now he did win an Olympic gold, so it's not as if you can say it wouldn't have paid off. But you know, as a horse progresses through the ranks, you do need to rationale as to why you should be backing it. And when they win, it's easy because you think, I wish I had. But look, Colreevy in theory was up against, you know, two horses, that one of which clearly underperformed and the other one possibly underperformed. So take nothing away from Colreevy, but from a punting point of view, your thought process was probably correct, because if you backed every horse that you thought you ought to just in case, then you will lose.
But I'm still sort of in the infancy of my punting career, really. I'm still learning a little bit about some of the trends that I think I should follow more and less and whatever. It's interesting. Day 3 of Cheltenham this year, I could have sold my spreadsheet online. Day 2 of Cheltenham, it was like I didn't have a clue. And that's just the game, isn't it?
But that's what makes it fascinating. That's a really interesting. So when I was accountant, you know, you're either a good accountant or a bad accountant in that sort of sense. And if you're a good accountant, you sit next to the person next to you all year, and at the end of that year, you get a 2.5% pay rise more than they do. Yeah, that's the way it worked when you were in industry. Exactly what you've just said. You can be brilliant one day, and you can use exactly the same factors, and you'll be absolutely rubbish the next. And that's where the challenge is. Can you keep evolving that challenge? You know, the old Channel 4 days, you know, we used to have to come off air for Countdown. And that was the Countdown. Countdown was the big number Channel 4 program at the time. So racing always stopped for Countdown. And I remember sitting one day chatting to someone saying, if only I could explain to everyone who watches Countdown that racing is 15 times more interesting and trickier than Countdown. But I can't, you won't let me teach you the rules, or you won't invest enough time to learn the rules, you know. And that, for me, it's a fascination. You're never good enough. You know, what you learn might go out of date. And that, for me, that's why it's a lifelong love. And it will be for you as well. It can be very frustrating. And as soon as you think you've cracked it, you're about to take a very, very bad fall and a bloody nose. You never have. You never have.
Obviously, Clanders Obo, brilliant yesterday. Where are you on the British versus Irish horses? What do you think we need to do?
I think it's a simple. So again, can I be really boring and put my accountant's hat on?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's all about product, isn't it? If you want to produce something good at the end, your raw material needs to be as good as possible. Mm-hmm. And cleverly, over the last 4 or 5 years, the younger horses, the better younger horses, have all tended to go to Ireland. We can debate why that is the case, etc. But that has been true. And if you think about National Hunt, which is really where we're talking, you think of it in layers. You've got racing generations from 4 right the way through to 10. Mm-hmm. So if at the bottom, coming up the bottom, that sort of first brick, number the 4-year-olds, Ireland have a slight advantage. Then we go forward a year, and the next group that comes up, Ireland have a slight advantage. And now they've got a slight advantage in 2, and the British advantage is dropping off the top. You've lost the 10-year-olds. When you've gone 4 or 5 years, all of a sudden somebody sits and thinks, blimey, virtually every generation now coming through, a stronger raw material from Ireland. Better trainers, better horses, no, better trainers, unfair, better raw material for the horses, for the trainers to deal with. So that's what you need to change. You need to change the buying power. I'm not a massive believer that prize money plays a massive difference in, if you spent 500 grand on a horse, I still can't see why winning a novice hurdle for 10 grand versus 8 is actually that relevant. I do understand it's very important to keep owners in racing. I just don't think it's relevant as to why Ireland's better than Britain in this point. I don't think the trainers are that much better. I think, you know, Paul Nicholls, Willie Mullins, Henry de Bromhead's had a fantastic year, but probably would, you know, never have the like again. So I think it's all about raw material. I think it's about the stock. I think it's about who has the purchasing power, who sees that good horse. Did an interview with Henry de Bromhead where he says, if a good horse wins on a point-to-point on a Saturday or Sunday in Ireland, it's like a viewing for a house. He said, I'll be driving halfway across Ireland and I'll have half an hour to look at this horse. And I know after me is Willie's agent or somebody else's agent or somebody else's agent.
Yeah.
And you have to snap it up. And it's having the people that can do that. If you can do that, then, and for me, that's the challenge that the British horses face, is how you get the next generation that comes up through the bottom being fairly distributed as opposed to benefiting Ireland. So that's what they need to address.
I like that you brought up Henry de Bromhead, because he has, it's been unbelievable. And I know, obviously, the Cheveley Park stud went over to him, and I think rightly so. He also, I love that he just comes across as just a nice fella.
I thought the interview with him and Rachel Blackmore after the National that Ed and the team did at the podium was just so refreshing. Just so refreshing. Both of them looked as if they just really couldn't believe that they were standing there describing something they'd, in Rachel's case, just done, ridden a national winner.
Yeah.
In Henry's case, just trained another one, 1-2 to go with the 1-2 he'd had in the Gold Cup.
Unbelievable.
But I think that sort of wonderment and incredulity, rather than, pretending they'd always expected it or anything like that.
It was beautiful. And what about, I can't be on a podcast with my favourite commentator and not ask about Rachel Blackmore and Bryony. My favourite interview with Rachel is when Chapman's saying first female jockey, and she keeps saying, no, just jockey.
Absolutely.
And I love, she's simply brilliant. But how have you found, has that been super exciting? Because obviously Bryony winning the King George was amazing, and on Frodon, write a better story. But has that been an amazing ride for you? Because it's only been the last few years that they've properly come to
absolutely
in the media.
Let's throw Holly Doyle in on the flat as well, because I think she, it's a similar story. So yes, the story when we started out with all this was female participation in sport on equal terms. It's something racing does that virtually no other sport does. From tennis to football to and cricket. Great attributes that women in those sports have, but they don't compete on level terms with men. Not on a day-to-day basis. So yes, it was a women's thing initially. And then, as you say, as it became more prevalent, particularly in Holly and Rachel's case, they don't really like that term. But journalistically, that is why it leads the BBC News.
Yeah.
So, if pick a random jockey, Sam Twiston-Davis had won the Grand National, it would have got a passing mention right at the end. But Rachel Blackmore winning the Grand National, and it's everywhere. So you have to pay lip service to why it's making the news, but full well, particularly in Rachel's case, as you say, right from the word go, it's not, gender might be important to you, but it's not to me. And so that's the only time we'd done in this day and age, you have to be really careful with language, literally so careful. The derivations of some phrases, are now analysed, and you trot out something that you didn't really understand meant this or had that, you don't certainly mean it, but it causes offence to other people for different reasons. So we've just done a whole series of language, trying to work out which phrases, etc. And gender is obviously part of that. It's more race in football, but it's more gender in horse racing. And so when they jump the last, she's very easy to commentate on, Rachel, because she's very transparent. You can tell how she's going. And you can tell she rides with a great deal of confidence. And looking at her going to the last, I remember thinking, you're going to win unless you do something silly. The horse turns turtle here, or you panic and you go too soon. And she didn't ask times over the last. She let him find its stride, and she sat still for 10 strides after the last. And I remember thinking, right, you're going to win. You're going to win the National. We're going to have a female rider win the National. Now, what are you going to do? How are you going to play this? Because I had quite a good few days. I was nice and clear in my thought. I wasn't struggling. I knew what all the horses were. So what do you do? And I was so worried, thinking back to that course, that I might use a word, a female or a lady or anything that might cause offence, that I remember thinking, right, no gender until after the line. Because if you cock it up and use a wrong word, it will be there for all time.
Yeah. Like we talked about earlier,
Yeah. Whereas it's after the line, and you want to draw attention to the female aspect, it's fine, because after the line gets cut, or it's capable of being cut without ruining the soundtrack to the race. So all I'm going to do here is I'm going to try and find something that matches the achievement and I'm going to keep saying Rachel, because if I keep saying Rachel, it's pretty obvious she is female, and then I can't remember exactly what I used, but it's raise the bar still higher or something, trying to find something that gives you some semblance of what's being achieved, but doesn't for her, because that is not what she would have wanted. She would not have wanted that being the focal point. It is the focal point. We all know that, but it's not what she wants. And I really was conscious of thinking, I don't want to hang that round your neck every time you listen to that finish, if you're listening to me as opposed to someone else, and use one of the best jockeys to have won it afterwards. But yeah, it's really strange. I can remember that run, and I always will do. I can, just looking back, thinking you've got plenty of time here. She's going to win. She's going to win comfortably. So you don't have to worry. You just have to try and push that to the side. And it's amazing if you could just have a little ticker running at the bottom of a screen when you're commentating. It would be hilarious viewing, because some days you're thinking, what the bloody hell is that? Or who's that? Or what that? Can't string a sentence together. And other days, you're literally having things flood into your mind and thinking, no, that's no good. Don't like that. Keep that. It's amazing. And a bit like your punting, the following day can be completely different. You think you're on top of the game. They go down for the first. They jump the first. You're thinking, what the hell's going on? I can't string a sentence together. You just have to cut your cloth then and play the game that way. It's like watching football matches, isn't it? They're brilliant players who have off games. And actually, it's your off games being all right on an off game can sometimes be far more creditable than curling in a 30-yarder when you're on top form. So, it was a really, really memorable. But she's come across subsequently as well as being such a, fantastic ambassador with a slow burn like Holly. They weren't immediate successes overnight, neither of those two.
No.
And it's just their attributes and strength. Holly's fitness is just unbelievable.
Great. That's a lovely story, really, to go to the ad break this week. When we come back, we'll have more from Mr. Richard Hoiles on the Beyonce Knows podcast. Tight shoulders, backache, hunchback of Nostradamus. Buy this donut-shaped face cushion today and ask your partner for a massage. If they say no, you can always use it as a hemorrhoid cushion. Buy the Bum Face today, the 2-in-1 cushion for all your rectal and relaxation requirements. Conditions apply. May cause pink eye if you're a gassy rascal. The coronavirus pandemic has shut down a lot of businesses, including libraries. And what are librarians to do when they're out of a job? How are these often highly dynamic, stimulating singletons supposed to find their way in the world? Reorder a tin of alphabeti spaghetti? Make a sentence from some potato alphabites? Well, look no further than mundaneemployment.com for all of your snoozeworthy employment needs. Welcome back to Beyonce Knows. I'm joined by Richard Hoiles, ITV Racing commentator today, also Racing TV, I believe, or Racing UK. I'm not sure what it's called. Racing TV?
We've had. So one of the great joys I've had doing commentary is that there isn't actually enough. People think, whoever has the terrestrial job is the lucky person who can just commentate for a living. Otherwise, you get 100 days on the racecourse max, really.
Right.
So you do other things, and so I was fortunate enough, to fall into presenting and doing other things for the original racing channel on day one. On day one, I did the first afternoon broadcast with Ian. Jeff Selling had done the morning. And then, every permutation from that ever since. Not as much now for Racing TV, was Racing UK, was at the races, both at the races in those days. And Racing Channel before that. So, I've been very, very lucky to indulge my passion, really.
We, after the ad break, most weeks we go into the Legend and Loser feature of the week, where I pick out somebody who's done something brilliant and somebody who's done something not so brilliant. Would you like to give me yours, or do you want to hear mine first?
Let me hear yours first, and then I'll have a considered thought as to who may be.
I've actually got two legends this week. First one is Renee McGregor, who was the guest on my last podcast. She's a sports dietitian, but first half of her podcast was about some of the racial abuse she's suffered in her life, and the fact she spoke about it was unbelievably brave and totally inspiring. To openly discuss it. It was very poignant in these strange times that we live in. So Renee McGregor is one of mine. The other, an honourable mention, must go to Kate Garraway. Her book, I think The Power of Hope it's called, came out this week. Obviously, her husband suffered and only just come out of hospital from COVID. So Kate Garraway, I think, presents herself and comes across really, really nicely. My loser is Joe Exotic off of Tiger King. Because this week he's come out in the media and claimed that his imprisonment, and I'll read his quote, my imprisonment was a kidnap for political agenda. And I just think it's totally hilarious. I think he's probably imprisoned for being convicted of murder for hire, but he's saying it's for a political agenda. So he's finding his way back into the news. So Joe Exotic is my loser of the week. Who are yours?
Well, I'd better stick to racing because I think that's probably what I know most. I suppose that the legend of the week has to be Willie Mullins in many ways, really. It's a little tedious in that sense, but I think it got a bit lost how many winners he was having at Punchestown. And again, he's a man who's at the top of his profession, and it's very easy to be blasé about those achievements. Loser of the week are those in charge of the Melbourne Cup, who have managed to put in place more hurdles than Colin Jackson ever jumped in his entire athletics career, but have done so. And the reason they're losers is, look, horse welfare is fantastically important, absolutely. Mm-hmm. But some of those requirements for things like bone scans are very, very intrusive to horses, as Kevin Blake was explaining to me on our own podcast yesterday, about the fact that you have to sedate, you have to inject with a luminous drug, effectively, luminous liquid to make it all light up. And then they can't even go home that night because they need to be under observation. Now, how on earth is that, those sort of barriers to taking a horse to run in a race halfway around the world fair? They're not applied to the domestic horses because the belief is that those that are broken down in the Melbourne Cup have tended to be international horses who in some shape or form are just not capable of running on the harder Australian tracks. There are two facets to that which are stupid. One is that the quarantine area at Werribee, which is where all the overseas horses stay, has been deficient for a few years. And even many of my Australian friends would say that. So that is an obvious way of improving facilities, either improve them at Werribee or move them elsewhere. And the second thing is you water the track. It's why we never race on good to firm ground anymore. If you want to reduce fatalities, you water the track. Yeah, that was one of the three recommendations that wasn't adopted by Racing Victoria of the 44. And the reason, well, obviously, European horses would fare better. And look, we're only asking for a level playing field, but to be protectionist in the name of welfare makes them definitely loser of the week.
Fair enough. Good one. There was two things that came from that. Horse welfare we'll cover in a minute, but I just wanted to ask you, Winx was Australian.
Winx, absolutely, yeah.
Do you think Winx would have done well over here?
I don't know. It's asking a lot. And she was by the end of her career, a bit like when I worked in Hong Kong, it was the same. You've got a really good horse in Hong Kong. We've got one at the moment, Lucky 60, who's now 14 unbeaten or 14 out of 15. Felix had one. Felix Kutsi was talking before. We had one called Silent Witness. They just kept beating the same horses. It was fantastic, and they racked up huge winning sequences. And Winx was beating good quality horses. Don't let anyone kid you that she wasn't beating high quality European horses who are capable of winning. We're talking about Melbourne Cup, European horses going down and winning that. So she was achieving a great deal. However, it would have been a big step, just as it would have been for Frankel to go to a breeders or to campaign outside of Europe. It would have been a massive step, particularly for a filly or a mare, to get. And so, do I think? No, I'm not 100% sure she would. But that's not That's not because I don't believe she had the ability. It's just the difficulty of transporting horses remains quite high. And she would have been competing probably on a softer track against a different set of horses that were all genuine Group 1 horses. So it's a shame she didn't, but I fully understand, based on what we were just saying about your Altiors and your...
absolutely.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. You're the one to be knocked off the crown. And from the public following she had, then I think it's really, really important. So I remain unconvinced that she would have fared brilliantly, just as I remain unconvinced that Frankel necessarily might have fared brilliantly, because there's often reasons why they don't, travel too well.
Yeah. The other one was horse welfare, which is obviously and rightly so, is very much at the forefront of a lot of conversations at the moment. And I think Ed did a great job discussing it, and rightly so, bring it to the forefront of people's minds. Do you think we're over the saga, for want of a better word, from the Gordon Elliott yard last year? Do you think there's more we need to do to convince the non-racing public?
Yeah, that's a big question, isn't it? In lots of different segments. I think the issue with the Gordon Elliott thing was that to us that work in racing, it was equally as abhorrent to everybody else. It just does not reflect the industry that I see on a daily basis. And that's what makes it really frustrating, because it is an open goal for those that want to paint the sport that I love in a negative way. And I would argue, I'd happily have constructive debate with anyone who has a different view. Really, really would. You know, my concern, as with lots of discussions, is that social media is making things black and white, and the real debate of anything takes place in grey. That's where you have the constructive arguments, where you listen to somebody who disagrees with your own view in a polite, reasoned manner, and you may well take on board something that they say. The problem with the extremes, the black and white, they have no interest in listening to the other side. If anyone wanted to listen to my argument for horse welfare, it is that they are racehorses. They are bred to race. Their idea of utopia is not being turned out in a field, never to be ridden, and have human contact. Indeed, many of them need feeding at exactly the same time. They can only be mounted on the run because that's the way they've been taught. And if you took away the commercial reality of racing, the potential of finding the next great sire, you would inadvertently consign multiple more horses to death than would ever be killed on a racetrack, because they're hard to keep and they don't have any commercial value anymore. And so as a result, that's when cruelty tends to occur. You cannot function in industry if your raw material, the fantastic horse that determines your fortunes, is mistreated. You just can't. If you're knocking off too big a percentage of your raw material, your whole sport doesn't work. Now, it's not meant to sound callous, and it really isn't. The sad thing is that as we stand at the moment, injuries to horses, which seem, when you say broken leg, well, just like us, put them in a cast for 6 weeks and they'll be fine, won't they? Well, no, they won't, because they won't not put weight on it. If you support them, they'll end up with laminitis, or they'll end up with all the fluid going to one part of their body because they're not moving. And so in actual fact, there is a cruelty aspect. Welfare can always be better, and we must never just accept, but at top level sport, risk is also inevitable. And sadly, some of those injuries that horses incur during their racing careers are fatal ones, and we shouldn't back away from that, and we shouldn't not mention it on ITV when it's happened, and we shouldn't be sad. We should not be sad about it and acknowledge it. But there is an element of risk. If you don't want any horses killed, then effectively it doesn't get achieved that way. Horses break legs in fields. They do, they jump over
it
fences.
happens.
But look, there's a really good debate to be had in the middle, and there's a lot of education that can go on. But you see the people in the yard. I went to the British Racing School the other morning to talk about something completely different. And I chatted to a guy who was a maths teacher who was 24, has got a kid, and suddenly decided he didn't want to be a maths teacher anymore. He loved horses and he was going to go and ride.
Right.
And he left behind his previous work. I saw someone riding with a prosthetic arm. I saw a girl who told me she'd struggled at school, couldn't with her own age group, and her only communication skills were with horses through riding. Now, you need that side as well. Horses play a massive part in people's lives. Racehorses play a massive part in people's lives. And they're not just horses you puddle around a field. So I'll get off my soapbox. But, I do think there's a balanced debate to be had, but it's not what I see on a regular basis. The level of care, the need to prepare an athlete in the peak of condition. People cross the lines in all sports. And when that happens, like the Gordon Elliott case, it's important that the punishments are robust and we exclaim from the rooftops, how unrepresentative that is. But the sport I see on a daily basis is something that we really can be proud of, and yet somehow we sort of feel that we just have to be on the defensive too much. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't acknowledge these things, but we have great stories to tell, and hopefully that's what ITV can do, and continue to make people appreciate that it is not horses running around potentially getting killed for people to have a bet on.
No.
So much more goes into it than that.
Yeah. My first experience of it was, before we put this to bed and well, not put to bed, move on to something more lighthearted, because I did promise lighthearted, was Sir Eric in, I want to say, the Triumph.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, he was reshot at the start, yeah?
Yeah, and I would have won. It would have been my biggest ever win, because I had 4 or 5 horses running into that race. And whatever, I didn't, who cares about the money? And few people said, oh, well, it's because of the, they have to replace his shoe at the start and all this. I'm saying, no. They've done an impeccable job. If there was a risk, and that was my first experience of people having almost a go at me for betting on it, and saying, hang on, no, those guys down there are the best of the best. This is Cheltenham Festival Gold Cup Day. They're the best of the best. If that horse isn't healthy to go, they go. The leg break on the first or second fence or hurdle was freak, and it happened. But again, like you say, it's black versus white on social media, and that's not the place to debate, because you can comment and then you can leave it and think you've won.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and we know from ITV that the battle of welfare is not best fought when you've just witnessed something horrific. It's best fought on a weekly basis when we explain the level of veterinary care. We explain the retraining and the rehoming of X-ray sources. We show where they are now. Some of those features we show off the back. Here's Big Bucks in a field at 21 being looked after by someone who rode him in his days. And that's the battle that you drip feed into it, because there is no doubt that seeing a horse like Sir Eric that had stood there beautifully, whilst I think it was Luke at the start, described how this fantastic looking horse was standing there just having his racing plate, put back on. Something that happens to all horses every day under farriers before they race, and then to witness what happened, 2 minutes later, everyone witnessed just how superb that horse looked. Is gut wrenching. It absolutely is. I still remember. So my first experience was Fairy King. I was a lad who was going racing, 16, 17. Fairy King was a good chaser of Jimmy Fitzgerald's. I used to go out and watch by the fences. I went to the second last at Kempton, and Fairy King subsequently turned out had a hemorrhage approaching the fence, never took off, just walked straight through. It was probably dead before it hit the ground, but and you see the whole thing play out in front of you. They weren't as good with screens in those days and things like that. And I remember the lass running up the track, in absolute floods of tears, caressing the horse's head and everything. You should just walked away, but at that stage you're young, and and it was horrific. And you have to go away and rationalize it. You have to go away and think, okay, that horse, died before it reached the fence. Yes, it was under exertion and it was a race, but it is a racehorse. And then you see the other horses, in the same race and other races, straining every sinew, jumping loose, galloping to the line, horses that genuinely have a will to win. If they're not ridden out every day, you hear trainers, I tried to retire this 3 times and he stood over the fence and hollered to come back to the string and all this sort of thing. They do enjoy it. Not all of them, but the majority do. Otherwise, you literally couldn't force them to.
Yeah.
But you do have to rationalize in your own way that there will be a cost, and that cost needs to be minimized as much as we possibly can. But we cannot say to people that it will not happen, because it will. It will. The same way that a footballer ruptures his cruciate. But they say, but footballers have a choice. But it's not that straightforward in that sense. It is, horses will stop on you if they don't want to do it. So they're trained to, but it is. People care passionately about horses that are involved in racing. We are not all callous people who just want to bet on things that run around fields and potentially can get killed. It really isn't. It really isn't like that at all.
We could go on that topic for forever and a day, could we? But I wanted to ask, what else makes Richard Hoiles tick? What else? What are your other interests? Obviously, I follow you on Twitter, and there's a lot of cricket stuff. What else makes you tick?
Yeah, sport generally, for sure. Cricket definitely was my Great love of sport. I played a bit, but I love the sport. So I come at all sport from numbers. I love cricket averages and scoring cricket matches. And that's how I got into racing, because obviously the form and that aspect, I'm not horsey at all. I came at it very much like the accounting from a numbers perspective. So yeah, cricket still does. I can relax at a county game. Some people find it intensely boring. Just give me, the first day of a county championship game at any small county ground for 2 hours, and I will be absorbed in the cricket and I can forget everything else. Literally, I will be watching ball by ball. I'm not dipping in and out of a paper or anything like that. I'm just watching it, and I absolutely love it still.
Brilliant.
Football, I'm a Crew fan. I'm quite loyal for years and years and years, and it's taken me some great places, actually. And that's one of the great things about what I've been able, to do. I just think it's great fun, but you do meet lots of people, and I achieved an ambition thanks to Graham McGarry and Radio Stoke of commentating on a Crew game 2-3 years ago now against Grimsby, which was absolutely so much fun and was really good. I mean, Graham's a great commentator, and I was just his sidekick, and Peter Morse was off for the week. But it was so much fun, so much fun. And the club were brilliant, particularly with my kids and the missus. I was interviewing David Artell afterwards, and the kids had been in the changing room beforehand. My little one, who wanted to be a goalkeeper, had warmed up on the pitch with the keeper. And the club were just absolutely superb. It was just the most memorable experience for them. They're not Crew fans, they won't be. But I learned accessibility for sport generally is great. I've got 2 kids, both of whom enjoy sport, one of which in particular. And when we go places like the local basketball, we go to Surrey Scorchers, because they can chat to the players coming off. They walk past them, go and change the changing rooms, and that access, and that's where cricket is really good. We've had brilliant experiences. There's several cricketers who really follow racing passionately. Will Smith, who made the jump over and is now a pundit on Racing TV. Mike Atherton, conversations with him. Owen Morgan. Craig and Jamie Overton. You see them virtually every West Country meeting, and I love that sort of transfer over. So other sport makes me tick. And the kids, I've got 2 boys, 13 and 10. Obviously, Sarah, has to cope with me being away for long periods. But watching them play football and cricket, but football in more recent years, brilliant, great level of fun. So that's the main thing. I'm really boring. I don't have many other hobbies. Racing was my hobby, became my job, and I've never replaced it really, other than cricket. Really,
that's the dream, right? If your hobby can become your job.
So it can become all consuming. You have to be a little bit careful, and home. Home is home, but it's also the office, and it's really hard for the kids, I think, sometimes to realise that I'm working from home. Or there's always another race I just need to watch, or could just watch, and I need to balance that off better, because you need to do a high level of work. When I started, I thought I was the luckiest person in the world to get the job, John, to be honest. And one promise I made myself was I wouldn't fail through not trying hard. I might not be good enough. I might not get the breaks, but I wouldn't ever get to the end and think, if only you'd just done that. Or you were a little lazy. You went out that night when you should have done this. And it's taken me so many places, from Hong Kong to Dubai to Japan to South Africa. Knowing people around the world in racing who I, look at and think, can't put myself on the same level as them. And yet they seem to. And you're thinking, this is really, really weird. So you're living out your dream. And as you say, it's fantastic for those of us that are lucky enough to do that.
I guess my last question, I mean, I could keep you on the podcast for hours, but I like you said, you've got to balance it. And I'm not sure the missus would be too happy if we're on this until midnight. We talked earlier, touched on briefly about if you're passionate about something, do it, try it. So this I've talked about doing a podcast, trying to start something forever. And finally thought, get off your ass and do it. What advice? So this is the episode 10, I believe. It's not just a podcast. I'm trying to do some other stuff. I'm hungry to. Obviously, I'd like the more people to see it, the better. What advice could you give to someone like myself to get into the media? Are there any golden nuggets?
No, in a way, but I think that's important in its own way, because as you can imagine, I do get people come up to me and say, I really want to be a commentator. I'm happy to chat. How did you get started? Well, actually, I had no experience, didn't even know I wanted to do it, and answered a job in the paper. I mean, I'm not exactly the role model for going to college and having voice training and all of the things that people will tell you to what you should do. So I think the first thing is there is no decisive route. The other thing I would say is don't pigeonhole yourself in too narrowly. Mm-hmm. Often the way into an industry is to accept something that doesn't immediately seem great, but leads you into contact with people. So what I mean by that is, say you work in, so we're always really keen that everybody who's involved in ITV Racing has an interest in the sport and ideally knowledge of the sport. Because if I've got open talkback, which means that everyone can speak to me, and they can during every minute of every program, even during commentaries, I have everyone in my ears. If I'm making a mistake, I don't need a spotter. I've got 15 in the truck who are going to shout at me, "You're calling X, Y, or you're calling this," or shout the name of just something that will alert me that I'm doing something wrong. And they're part of it with you, and it's all that sort of communal thing. So it might be that the graphics operator has an interest in racing. And it might be that your way into broadcast or podcast or radio is doing something you wouldn't necessarily have thought of, but it's relevant. And then one day someone doesn't turn up, or you get asked, "What would you like to do, John? You've expressed an interest in that. And I've got more loyalty to you because you've worked with me and you're part of my team. So I'll give you a run." And that's the point. I think that the thing that holds most people back is they don't believe they have as many skills as they do. We have this with jockeys. One of the great things that I've been involved in is a trustee of JETS, which is the Jockeys Education and Training Scheme. It encourages jockeys during the course of their riding careers to do other things. And they look at you as if you're barking. And they say, "But I left school at 16 when I weighed 6 stone 5. I'm not education." I say, you talk to owners though, don't you? You explain tactics. You discuss tactics with trainers. You watch your weight. You count your calories. So there you go. That's maths. That's English. That's, you have far more life skills that you develop as you get older than you think.
Yeah.
And they're far more transferable than most people think. So think outside the box. Don't think too narrowly. And don't think that if you didn't take a media studies degree and get a first. And finally, I suppose the other thing is lots of ad hoc stuff. This goes back to kids younger than you or I, certainly younger than me, to help out on your hospital radio, to get some work experience, to go and spend some time in a truck, see what those range of ones are. My eldest lad, trying to drag him off his PS5 is my bane of my life. But I have to admit, his mental imaging, 3D and what have you, is fantastic. And he edits up stuff because he wants to be a YouTuber. And his editing is fantastic. Now, I can see an outlet for that within racing. I see it every day in a truck. I see brilliant people edit, and you're thinking, actually, Jack, you keep doing that. It's all right. You might find an outlet for that, which backs one or the other. And who knows, you might be the greatest YouTuber. I can't rain on your parade just because I think it's really unlikely. And I'd rather you were doing your French homework. But, you've got to let them live that dream. So, don't be too narrow. Go for it. Do it. Put yourself out there. Show what you can do, because someone, it's opportunity. It's that opportunity. I can't tell you when you can get that, but when it comes, you need to be as well prepared to take it as you possibly can. And how are you going to expect to be well prepared if you don't give it a go?
Yeah.
Looking back, I'm still not the greatest advocate of that, because I really did busk it for the first few years. But you don't admit it. You just do it, and that's, so go for it, John. Go for it, wherever it is. And whatever anyone's watching this, that they think, I just haven't quite got round to it. Maybe that's what lockdown's done for lots of people. Maybe lockdown has made people think, right, I'm actually going to...
Time to have a go. Yeah. The last feature before I wrap up is the refer a friend feature, where I'm asking every guest to try and refer an interesting, from any walk of life, somebody they think could be interesting on the podcast. If they come on the podcast, I pledge to donate money to a charity each time that happens.
That's an interesting one. Do you want it to be in my own sphere, or can I make it as
completely your choice?
Okay, that's an interesting one. What would I say? I think I should go for a sportsman that's not mine, and not anyone I know, because I think that's a bit. Whilst I'd love you to win money. For charity,
I mean, the idea being, if you know them, hopefully you can give them a nudge.
give them a nudge to come in on. How high do you want to play this? Who I think is a really interesting person? Well, I mean, the easy one for me, and he is a really interesting person, and he's got the football aspect, would be Ed Chamberlain, because I think the television side, I've talked about commentating, but television presenting is completely different.
That would be fantastic.
I think the passage of it's and the challenge of presenting on terrestrial television is completely different to specialized sports channels. And
yes,
that's where we get pasted lots by people who love their racing. You say, "God, I don't see enough of the horses." We know that, but at the same time, they have to accept that we are trying to bring people into the sport through various ways to get them hooked like you did, and to keep them on board rather than just switch off and make it too niche. It's hard balance to get, and sometimes we get it wrong, and sometimes we feel we get it wrong, but others from outside, we say, no, you need to widen it. So he's fascinating for that. And obviously he's fascinating about his time in football, battle with cancer as well. There's all sorts of elements to that. His work with World Child, which obviously crystallized with them sponsoring the World Cup, or having the Gold Cup named after them, this year.
Yeah.
So, so I'll give it to Ed, and I'll
give him a nudge.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, just to wrap it up, thank you so much. Like I said at the start, I'm a horse racing enthusiast. So for me, this couldn't have been a podcast. This could just been a geek off for me. Really enjoying talking to you. But from my perspective, thank you. You've been very respectful. It's been really, really interesting, and I've absolutely loved it. So thank you for coming on the podcast. I'm sure the listeners will enjoy your insights into the sport and the answers to your questions. It's been, for me, completely brilliant. So thank you very much.
Well, best of luck with it, John. I'm a firm believer in, I know it was a pretty random way we got in touch through Twitter, but I'm a firm believer. I think one of the nicest things that happened to me this week is on Twitter, because Twitter, as you know, can be a minefield.
Yeah.
There was a message from another lad who we'd done an interview of something a little while ago, and I know he contacted Josephine Gordon and got a little message back saying today, just to let you know, I got a first in my, whatever it was, the paper he put in, and thanks for your time. And that's for me what it's about. So best of luck for you for the future, and hope people enjoy listening to it, and it prompts them to listen regularly.
Yeah, thank you very much.